Video, açık mavi fon rengi üstüne gelen lacivert BCF Keşif logosu ve Avrupa'da Caz'ın sınırlarını tekrar açmak. Sinem Tabagoğlu, Birath, Nadin Deventer ve Moderatör Murat Sezgi yazısıyla başlar. Ekranın ortasında moderatörün ve konuşmacıların fotoğrafları görülür. Konuk Sinem Tabagoğlu bir camın önünde oturmaktadır. Cam açıktır ve duvar beyazdır. Sinem Tabagoğlu'nun üzerinde siyah V yakalı askılı bir elbise görülür. Saçları omzunda bitmektedir. Hemen sol omzunda bir çiçek görülür. Birath, posterlerin olduğu bir duvarın önünde oturmaktadır ve beyaz bir gömlek giymektedir. Birath'ın bıyıkları ve sakalları belirgin şekilde uzundur. Saçları ise kısadır. Nadin Deventer beyaz bir duvarın önünde oturmaktadır. Sağ tarafında pencere görülür. Üzerinde siyah beyaz çizgili V yaka askılı bir bluz görülür. Kulağında kulaklık takılıdır ve saçları arkadan toplanmıştır. Murat Sezgi yeşil ağaçların önünde oturmaktadır. Üzerinde siyah bir tişört vardır ve kulağında kulaklık takılıdır. Sakalları belirgin şekilde uzun, saçları ise kısadır.
Thank you very much, guys, for giving me the opportunity and the time today and be with us. We will be doing a short panel, like a webinar, for Bozcaada Caz Festival's followers and audience. Here we have today Nadine from Berlin Jazz Fest. If I said it right, yeah? Berlin Jazz Fest.
Yes.
Yeah. And Eric from Stockholm Jazz Festival and Fasching, and we have Sinem from Comet Live, her own operation. She's also the manager for Jojo Mayer, which is one of my favorite musicians in the world. Funnily, actually, I've seen the show last time in Stockholm in Fasching, where Eric is the head of everything. So it was a nice show. It was a nice day. Thank you guys again. We will be giving some information about what you guys have been going through in terms of business during this COVID pandemic times to our followers. We have met several times with Nadine and Eric in different occasions. We have actually done a similar panel. It was almost the beginning of everything. It was more like a shock times. I haven't watched that video back, but we will maybe watch it a few years from now and see how depressed and maybe shocked we are. But we were still smiling and all that. So it's a few months from that. We also invited Sinem so she could give us some feedback about artists' point of view, both from Turkey and Europe. So here's a few questions. My first question will go to Nadine. I'd like to get your feelings about what you have gone through to make your operation work, or did you want it to work? I mean, like, how did you cope with the situation? And you could approach this question in different angles. It could be through fundings, it could be through audience, however you feel like, however it pops up.
Thanks, Murat, a lot for the invitation. It's always great to see you guys and exchange ideas and experience especially in these times of crisis. Well, now we are already at the end of August, right? And I remember the first webinar we did together quite at the beginning of the crisis. Eric was also there. And at that time, I was really pretty shocked. When was that? In April? Something in April. Corona crisis hit us with the team of the Jazz Fest Berlin in the middle of our peak planning period, which is usually taking place between January and May, to do the booking and all of the financial stuff for the Jazz Fest Berlin, fundraising, partnerships and everything, which is taking place at the beginning of November. And as you can imagine, I mean, all of a sudden the world changes. And until we understood the dimension of this big crisis, it took for everybody on this planet quite a while. And also, I think for us cultural operators, curators and organizers to realize the extent of the crisis and also to understand or to find a way of how to react on this. And it also took us quite a while. We went through different scenarios. I mean, we are in a very, very privileged situation with the Jazz Fest Berlin. It's part of a big umbrella organization, which is called the Berliner Festspiele. And the Berliner Festspiele, it's a national governmental funded organization. So financially speaking, of course, we have losses, but it's not at all comparable to privately organized clubs or other festivals. So having this very privileged situation, we started wondering and started to try to understand the situation for musicians in our city, in our country, and in Europe and the world. And you also mentioned, I think, that the Europe Jazz Network, it's a network for organizers, including more than 150 organizations from, I think we are more than 30 countries in the meantime. We very quickly installed a think tank, which helped at least me really quite a lot to understand the way other colleagues are thinking in Europe and the world and dealing with the crisis, to understand the difference between the politicians and politics reacting on the crisis, to exchange ideas. I mean, not to be alone with this. The Jazz Fest, for the Jazz Fest, with our tradition and also our history, the identity of the Jazz Fest is we are an international festival. This Corona crisis is a crisis on very different levels. One crisis is the crisis of mobility. The borders have been shut down during the lockdown, and still now temporarily we see across Europe and the world temporarily lockdowns of some cities or parts of countries or entire countries reacting on the development of the crisis. So the big question for organizers having an international program booking tradition was how to react on this. For the Jazz Fest Berlin, decided to concentrate on, of course, the Berlin scene, which is highly international and very diverse and exciting, but also to take a closer look at the history of the Jazz Fest Berlin, which has a very American history. It's more than 50 years ago that Martin Luther King gave a speech to open the Jazz Fest Berlin, which also has always been a very political enterprise. The Jazz Fest Berlin has been installed during the Cold War as also a symbolic gesture from the West to build a transatlantic bridge to America. Still, we are also in recent years, in past years, working still quite a lot with American artists, of course, also lots of European artists. But then seeing the development of the crisis also in the States, we realized that we should maybe react on this. So stick to our identity as the Jazz Fest Berlin and also kind of fulfill our obligations a bit. We have been talking with lots of artists, and usually also lots of American artists are touring during our festival period in October, November through Europe, as we all know. As we have been in touch with all of them, we try to find ways of how to keep them inside of our program, even though traveling would be impossible. And as it looks now, I think few people would think that that American artists would tour in November for Europe, even though lots of tours have still not been cancelled, and there's no real rule installed yet between Europe and the States until the end of the year, for instance. So what we have been, our solution that we came up with was to team up with a venue in New York to concentrate on the scene and the musicians coming from New York, from one city. And we are very lucky to have found the Roulette. It's a venue based in Brooklyn as a partner. And in case that the American artists are not able to travel, we will have in New York, Berlin. We will have 2 New York Berlin nights, meaning that we will have bands and musicians projects playing from New York and from Berlin in a kind of ping pong situation. Berlin, New York, Berlin, New York. We will stream this to both venues. We are at the Silent Green this year for the first time. Very interesting location located in the Wedding in Berlin. And we will also stream everything. And that was our plan B scenario. That would be the main part of this year's program.
Thank you very much for the reply. What's the relationship between Luther King and Berlin Jazz Fest again?
Martin Luther King visited Berlin, had a very, very famous visit to Berlin some 50 years ago. And he visited the eastern part and the western part of the city and gave speeches and everything. And he wrote a pre-word dedicated to the very first edition of the Jazz Fest Berlin. It's quite a big deal, right?
It's a pity I didn't know that. And it's actually great that you combine and connect all these thoughts to that kind of an angle. I found it pretty crazy when you first told me that, you know, you wanted to go with this New York Berlin angle. But then step by step, you kind of, you know, made it happen. So I'm looking forward to seeing that. There is always the counter argument that, you know, this, how do you say, playing in two venues, you know, the screens, the online feeling, streaming, etc. It won't, you know, give the same feeling, but on a different angle. Berlin Jazz Fest, you know, trying to open up the borders idea is really precious. And I'm sure that a lot of festivals, you know, will follow pretty much similar stuff. I've seen a lot of them you know, happening in electronic scene, but not so many, not so many in the jazz scene. So I'm gonna have a different question to Eric. Well, by the way, I was planning to invite all of you guys to Bozcaada Caz Festival this year, and we had discussions with Eric about this. I've invited Sinem a couple of times, sent offers to Jojo Mayer, either booked or too much fee level for us. But anyways, that's that's another discussion. And same with Nadine. We were planning to do a panel in Bozcaada, but maybe I'll try to have you guys next year. Eric, how did the city react to the pandemic? I mean, like, I know how it reacted kind of in the beginning, but maybe you could go over it again. And I mean, in the end, Nadine mentioned that they have the chance that, you know, with the umbrella organization they can kind of survive this pandemic. Even though I'm a private organization here in Bozcaada, Turkey, I still always felt that, you know, the festivals are still easy to handle this situation with having a fewer, fewer costs, fixed costs, so they could somehow make it to the next year, even though it's painful. Very hard for the venues, especially. Can you just describe how the city reacted and it's kind of reacting right now? Maybe both from the Fasching and Stockholm Jazz Fest angle. A bit long question, but I think you can handle.
Yeah, I'll do my best to give a kind of sum it up. I mean, I think as you all know, Sweden kind of went its own direction. We didn't have the same kind of lockdown as a lot of other countries in at least the West have had. People were still allowed to go to their works, but they were encouraged to work from home. Schools never closed, but there was quite immediately this restriction of you could only gather 50 people at one time. And that by effect kind of meant in the beginning that no one was going out, everywhere was empty. No one was coming to our shows. And of course, people were very scared of the virus, at least in the beginning. And this pretty much went on all spring. And we never kind of opened up in June as some other countries in Europe did, but the restrictions have still been the same throughout the summer holidays as well. No major festivals opening within jazz or any other circuit. And pretty much the frustrations in the cultural life has just been growing because the government was not really saying anything about the fall and what was going to happen, you know, because clearly everyone realized that the virus is going down in society. People are meeting more and more. Restaurants are reopening and people are sitting close by each other and so on. But we could still only gather 50 people at one time. So finally, last Friday, word came from the government that they're looking at a new plan to be installed on October 1st. And that will still mean that there will be a top sort of roof about how many people you can have. And this applies for both culture and sports, which I think is a bit of a problem because obviously it's, you know, very different if you're going to a soccer match with usually 30,000 spectators, or if you're going to Fasching, which has a capacity of 350. But still, they want to make the rules apply for everyone for this, the same kind of thing, which is quite impossible. But anyway, so starting October 1st, the situation will most likely be, it's not for sure yet, but that we are allowed to take in people, only seated. The tables have to be 2 meters apart. So actually today we've been walking around measuring and just seeing like how many people we can actually squeeze in with this 2-meter rule. And we don't want to stretch anything because obviously, we don't want to be part of spreading any kind of virus and extending, taking things too far. But we're still looking at opening, of having like 80 people come October 1st. At the same time, the government has already kicked in spring quite a substantial extra grant towards cultural businesses, and now they have said that they will do the same and more this fall. And we received grants from the municipality and the government for about almost 200,000 euros so far.
These are not loans, yeah, they're like grants.
These are not
And
loans.
I think they kind of expect you to pay a certain amount of invoices and stuff, yeah. It's not like a helicopter money where you can do anything.
No, I mean this is money. I mean the way that you apply is that you kind of, you have to calculate your losses and your costs. So it's, and I mean at the same time we still have about 14 people employed at Fasching that we're paying wages for. So obviously this is costing us somewhere around, even like with these different solutions, we're still bleeding about 50,000 euros every month. I mean, it's only correct that the government should pitch in some more money towards us, because I mean, the scenario otherwise would be that all these people would just go into unemployment. So in order to keep all the cultural businesses alive, they're actually keeping jobs alive. And, we're taking part of the burden of still employing people, and the government is also taking part of it. So I think it's a pretty fair deal. And, it's like, we're doing what we can, and then I'm sure we will get grants so that we will survive, and, yeah, I mean, I'm feeling pretty confident.
How do you keep the team spirit positive and alive? I mean, are they still, like teasing and joking about it, or is it like a scary situation? How's the general mood? I mean, think, because you're the leader of the team, I wonder how is it feeling for you?
Yeah, well, it's sometimes it's difficult to be a leader of the team when you have about 4 or 5 people in office staff, and that's okay. We're in touch every day over like Zoom or whatever, and like email chatting all the time. But then I also have about 8-10 people that are usually working in kitchen, bar service, and stuff like that. And I mean, tell you the truth, there's no real need for us to be in touch all the time. And these people, it's like we never connected with each other even through email before. So obviously, yeah, we kind of lose track of each other. We had, I think, maybe like 1 meeting before summer, and then we had a startup meeting now. But it's, until everything is up and rolling again, it is quite, we're all kind of just like spread around. But I mean, spirits are high, I think, within the kind of office staff and the people making the program. And, obviously we're like following things from day to day, like, oh no, shit, now like, Germany is putting up warnings against Belgium. What does this mean for tours in this fall and so on? And like Nadine said, we're not sure if we're gonna, because, we have lots of international stuff booked for the whole fall. Lots of American acts that we're not sure if they're going to be able to make it or not. And the agents don't know if they're going to be able to make it or not. So we're all in this kind of limbo situation where it's like, are they coming? Are they not coming? And if they're coming, what kind of deal are we looking at? Because now we can only, fit 75 people in here. It's like going to be very difficult for us to pay, say, 6,000 euros for a gig when we can only sell 75 tickets. So it's all these different kind of situations all the time. But yeah,
maybe the government-backed venues, spaces, festivals, they should really focus on the international angle. I think that was the logic Nadine was using from the beginning. Rather the clubs to focus on the private wants to focus on the local scene, a bit of the international angle, and the rest focusing on opening up the borders perspective. Yeah.
I mean, I think we do have government grants for the clubs, for the club, but it's only about worth 10% of our turnover. So I could say that the club could actually survive without grants even. But I mean, obviously, we can use the grants in order to have a sort of more radical programming, and more artistic programming. Whereas for the Jazz Festival, which is taking place in mid-October, we actually took the decision only 2 weeks ago that we will go ahead with the Jazz Festival.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and then we weren't sure if maybe we could only do concerts with 50 people at a time, but I think we're in a little bit the same situation as Jazz Fest Berlin, in that we have substantial grants for the festival, and I think it's important to do something, at least to be able to offer work opportunities for a lot of artists, because they can't apply for their own kind of grants. So it's only through us that they can actually get work, and they can take part of that money. So it's important for all kind of steps in this whole kind of ecosystem of concerts that we can go ahead and do something, because if we get grants, we can employ artists, we can employ technicians, I can keep my own staff employed, so on and so forth. So we're still hoping for some international artists, but we're not sure if they're going to come. We're trying to bring a few from the UK, which is looking more likely than the Americans. But otherwise it will be very much of a sort of Swedish affair, I think.
I'm gonna ask a question to the person at the limbo you're mentioning, Sinem. She's one of the strong characters I know in my life, but I want to ask her actually how strong she feels these days as a manager, keeping up the business, and also what was the reaction with the artists? Like, I mean, even as an artist, at an artist level like Jojo Mayer, who tours a lot, as far as I know, how do they feel? How do they cope with it?
Each one of them actually feels differently, because as a band, Jojo Mayer involves 2 sound engineers, and Jojo Mayer living in Zurich. The other part is in New York. They're running a business there. They have a studio. They've been kind of working this summer, so they have been surviving. Jojo is also working during this time, recording some soundtracks and doing some other things. I would like to point out that this was the first time for me when I didn't feel behind of Europe, because while we are discussing things, everybody was looking to each other. When I was reaching out to the promoters in the beginning of March, that we had a tour coming up in late April, asking them to be quick to reschedule, because I didn't think that it will happen in late April. Now it's the same situation. We just talk within us. We have a tour coming up in October, and I'm still the first one to reach out to reschedule them, because I don't think it's going to happen. I don't think they will be able to fly into Europe in October. And I also don't think that, international business is a luxury at a time like this. Since I live in Turkey, since we have gone through different crises like bombings or all of those political things going on in the country, we survived times like this, I guess. We had to focus on local artists. We also need to nourish them. We need to give them opportunities. We need to give them the scene, the stage for them to express and develop themselves. So what I was thinking about myself was I was thinking I would I would need to work with more Turkish artists in my local scene, because I'm content with what I do in Europe right now. And in terms of touring, it's not only that if Americans can come to Sweden or Berlin, are they going to be able to go to Norway after Sweden? Yeah. And then to Berlin after Norway, and then to Russia after Berlin? It's not just if an American can come to Germany, because we were thinking of rescheduling just because we saw some of the borders were almost closing down. I cannot keep my band in a city in Europe getting quarantined in a hospital or at a hotel and leave them out of job, away from their homes. So
it's pretty mixed situation, huh?
Yeah.
I mean not only if they can travel to one city, but also if they can travel between the cities. Yeah, that would be a very rough role that you're having. But do they want to play? Like, what's the reaction with them? I mean, are they like rock and roll? Hey, just let's fly to Berlin, let's get a few gigs and then play wherever we can? Or, I mean, do they want to have a fixed plan? Like, what's the situation?
No, that's why we are rescheduling again, because, well, the human desire to care for another is also more important during a crisis like this. A lot of festivals and a lot of venues actually shut down before the government told them to. We just don't want to survive in the cost of hurting us and each other. I guess all of us expected that we were not going to have a profit this year, but the survival was the main goal. Of course they want to play. I talked with Moddi yesterday. He lives in Norway. They have this huge support from the government. They can get 70% of what they earned the year before, while they're not working this year. Financially, they're very cool. They can invest their time to produce something new. But for example, he doesn't feel so great as well, because they want to perform before the audience. I mean, the live thing is not the same for them as the actual club or festival shows. So they want to come back. Well, for example, the thing for Americans are the same for us in Turkey. They don't get any support from the government. They earn the money mostly from touring Europe. So they've been in isolation in the country. So their resources will drain at some point. They won't be able to record because they won't be able to pay. It's also affecting their productivity as well, because they have to have money to be productive. They have to pay their rents, they have to pay the studio, they have to pay the gear. So it's not looking so great at that point.
Well, I mean, we don't. I mean, if it's gonna sound pessimistic, it's gonna sound pessimistic. So I think we just have to take a picture of the situation at the moment. I think it's cool. What I'm observing in Turkey, for instance, I don't know if it's everywhere the same in Europe, but it was summer in Turkey now, and everyone is having fun. You know, like they're at the sea. Somehow, I kind of feel like people don't really think about what's coming again, which you can kind of start feeling. It's a bit different in Germany. I think government is kind of gonna start to ease the situation. They are in touch with clubs, like they're kind of telling them how the procedure is gonna look like in fall. In Turkey, for instance, it's right the opposite. A wave is coming again, and everyone is just, you know, there is some music playing and they're dancing, and when the summer ends, it's gonna be a bit weird again. That's how it looks. I'm gonna ask you guys a question, and that's gonna be the last one, which is a big discussion right now again in Turkey. While the music business is, you know, and culture and arts mostly, but again, heavily music business. Being the first to close, it's gonna be again the last to open, I guess. And I've seen this caricature, this drawing of a French guy. Like he drew this, maybe I could show it on the screen later. This plane-like stage, a band is playing in the front of the plane, like an aeroplane, and the seats are like, how do you say, like an amphitheater. It's telling to the audience that, hey, we would be playing, if we would be playing in a plane, you would be fine, but when it's a club, it's no good. And I totally felt it to the bones, you know, like I was flying to Turkey 3 weeks ago. A guy is sitting right, I mean, the face is like here. And, you know, then you see all these measures saying in a plane, if everybody puts on masks properly, the chances of the spreading is 1 to 4,000. But what about a venue with, you know, proper ventilation? And I must emphasize really heavy that I'm not a fan of, how do you say, risking people's life. If we have to keep closed, I'm fine, it's going to be closed. But there is, I guess, a really bad unbalanced situation here. Like it's, you know, some of these industries are, you know, going just fine, but there is a huge attack on especially the live events. Could you guys comment a little bit on about this, how you're feeling about that? Nadine, let's start with you.
I also observe this, and also internationally speaking, I'm observing this. I'm just coming back from the Saalfelden Jazz Festival. It just took place last weekend, partly outside and indoors, and of course with a lot of restrictions. But then there also I realized that the countries, the measurements of the countries are quite different. So in Germany, as far as I understand, also for clubs, a standing audience is forbidden. We are only allowed to have a seated audience with all of this distance keeping rules. Saalfelden in Austria, a standing audience wearing constantly masks has been allowed. And of course, the capacity was reduced, but we could stand and also enjoy music, which is a bit more danceable. You could slightly move, and it was a bit weird with the masks, and also to wear masks for hours and hours while seeing concerts. It's of course not the same, but I would prefer this situation than to force an audience to be seated while the music and everything, the club is not at all made for this, for instance. So there are quite big differences in the way that politicians are dealing with the virus. And I can also understand this. I mean, this is a crisis situation for everybody. What I also observed is that in Belgium, there has been a big movement because the restrictions in Belgium have been really very, very high. And there is still a movement going on among the artist scene, like organizers and artists, musicians. Everybody is standing up saying, this is impossible, that you have the right to fly, as you said, Murat. You can go to restaurants and pubs, but no, the restrictions for cultural events is super high. It has been proven in Belgium by this movement that there is not one single known case that could have been traced because of all the names and everything that is taken by all of the visitors. There is not one single case has been there up to now that could be traced of infection, passing on the virus of any cultural event. So because the rules are quite strict, and apparently it is working, you know, so they are asking for a fair way of treatment for any cultural event in order to keep alive, and also to keep the social and cultural life and the well-being of not only musicians and artists alive, but also of the audience. You know, I mean, we are still at the beginning of this crisis, everybody says, and there might be the second or third wave or whatsoever, or local ones, but there are also other voices saying, medicine saying, researchers saying that even if the vaccine is coming up on the market until end of the year or at the beginning of next year, we need 2 billion vaccines, you know, to kind of get the virus under control. And we can all imagine how much time that might take only to produce this huge amount of vaccines. And then the big question is, if you can't force people to take it. So I'm only saying that this crisis is an ongoing crisis that is not at all under control. It can take us 1 or 2 years from now to kind of, if ever we would go back to normal, to get it under control, so to say. And that is quite a long period. And I'm also, I hope that the cultural world will be treated as important, let's say, as all of the other businesses that are allowed to open up. And of course, as has been already said, Simon, you said that nobody wants to risk other people's health or life. But I'm also seeing in the city of Berlin, I don't know, Murat, if you experienced this, but I'm feeling in our city, which is a very lively cultural place. The city of Berlin is known for its club scene worldwide and for lots of festivals, and the so-called cultural industries is a big, big part of the income of the city of Berlin. It is the image also of Berlin. And I can see now, by the time running, and it's now only end of August, that the atmosphere within the city is changing. So first of all, it has been very interesting that the city has been empty. So there were no tourists, it was only us. People have been locked in, literally, also here in the city, which I experience as very uncomfortable, very, very uncomfortable, to not have the freedom to choose and travel and move and stuff. But now, I went out for some locations for private birthday parties. There have been 3 in a row 2 weeks ago. And I experienced a lot of aggression in the streets. So let's say we have been out from 10 p.m. to 3 a.m. in the morning, just wandering around the streets in Kreuzberg, Friedrichshain, Prenzlauer Berg, Mitte, like all of these very well-known also party places, without any official party, of course, going on. And there has been like 3 occasions during that time where all of a sudden there was fighting going on. So really young men hit each other, you know, for maybe no reason, or they drank too much or whatsoever. And I never, ever experienced this in all of the previous years being here in Berlin. So I feel that there is something going on, and also these pop-up parties in parks. At the Hasenheide, there has been something going on, or at that riverside, this completely stupid boat demonstration, or you know, that have been escalations. All of a sudden, within no time, thousands of young people are resembling having an illegal party going on, you know, and then police is coming and they need to get, of course, it's ending all of these gatherings, and then all of these hungry young people go out into the cities, and they kind of, I mean, there is no football going on, no sports event, no cultural big events. The society needs to kind of also understand the relevance of all of these of this culture, you know, that we have. And I can feel now, by the time running, that there is also frustration and more aggression in the streets, you know.
You mean you can't fulfill this only with Netflix and stuff, yeah?
Not at all, apparently, no. But really, like, to be nearly involved in all of these fightings, I don't know Berlin like this, you know, and that's, yeah, it's I think it's not a coincidence.
What do you think, Eric, about the music being the last to reopen, and this, you know, weird situation with compared to other industries?
I think I agree with Nadine. A lot of these, I mean, exactly what she says, it's true for Sweden as well. And I think, I mean, now it's been summertime and things have been, it's been okay. You know, it's like everyone's been outdoors. But I think the real challenge will come now, you know, in like September, October, once it gets darker and colder, people can't be out anymore. And I mean, I haven't seen fights or anything, but I was talking to a guy who runs a like semi-big brewery the other day, and they've had their best summer ever in 24 years this summer. So alcohol sales have been up like soaring, you know, and I can only speak for myself. I mean, I always tend to drink a bit too much in summer, but this summer has been crazy. But I've been in my country house, you know. But I think people that hanging out in the cities have just gone bonkers, you know. So I mean, I think there will be lots of frustration once fall hits, you know, and people will want to come. And of course, everyone that's doing, you know, concerts and so on, we're kind of like building up our expectations for this giant boom to come once restrictions are lifted. People will want to come out and so on. I mean, we're about to release some concerts now for September and October. Just, it's going to be so interesting to see if people actually will start going directly, you know, or if people are still reluctant. I think older people will still be reluctant to go, and of course, there's been a lot of talk about, you know, like perhaps the isolation of elders is actually more dangerous than, you know, than COVID at the stage that COVID is now, because it's not so widely spread anymore. I don't really see any solution because, I mean, no one wants to be part of the spreading of this virus. We're all doing what we can, and I mean, I see that we that have some partial grants and other sort of venues that have more grants from the government, we're starting to open up. We're doing what we can, but I think it's for the private initiatives and the private clubs and stuff like that, it's going to take a lot longer for them to do actual culture. Right now, they're still relying on like having one DJ and getting people together to drink, you know. So live culture is going to take a huge dive.
Thank you, Eric. Sinem, the same question for you. And sorry, one last question, just a few sentences to all of you. And I'm going to end with Eric. The winner gets wine in Bozcaada from me next year. And the question will be, how do you guys feel like 2021, how do you say, for live music business? Is it going to be, you know, thriving back again? Because I've met a friend of mine. He's like a fortune teller, but I mean, he's not a fortune teller. He just, the way he is, you know, he guesses things well. He thinks that it's going to be pretty thriving for 2021. I don't feel like that really. So I'm just going to take your guess. How's the business going to look like in 2021? But let's start with Sinem with the first question.
The first question is probably a bit different for us in Turkey than for you guys in Berlin and Stockholm, because the first part of this period, the first 3 months, people had to be in lockdown during the weekends and had to go to the work during the weekdays. So it was unfair from the beginning. People below 20 and people above 65 years old were in complete lockdown. So we already knew that the country we live in doesn't make sense in any case. I personally was feeling very good for the first 3 months. Guess that I needed that silence and space for myself. But then, as you, Murat, when I fly to the South Coast in July, I heard the announcement that they are serving food in a 50-minute flight. By the time I was tired of not being able to do my job and for not being able to see shows, which I love, I felt like, well, people are not dealing with a low blood sugar for 50 minutes, but we have to shut down our businesses for a year or so. So my mind is going to dark places at times. I feel resentment, I feel anger. I know that I cannot control what others do, but I also can't control what I feel. That's the feeling I have. I'm angry. Yeah, music business is not fair also. The money that people control is some part of artists hold maybe 90% of the revenue in whole world. So we are maybe in the 5% of this industry. And I think that will change. I think that will change for the next maybe 3 years or so, not just 1 year. We are not going to see big stadium shows as an entertainment for people who likes to listen to live music. Maybe it might be blooming for the scale of our businesses, because people are not going to be able to go to Beyonce shows anymore for maybe next 3 years. But people are going to be able to go to Berlin Jazz Fest. People are going to be able to go to Bozcaada. So we might benefit from this for a while. I think I'm optimistic.
For the mid-scale, you mean, yeah?
Yeah.
Small and mid-scale,
Yeah.
What about you, Nadine? What do you think for 2021? How do you feel like it?
I think that, as I said, I think that this crisis will still be going on in 21 and maybe for a couple of other years. Maybe there might be other similar crises coming up. Maybe we as the society, we need to kind of deal with this in general perspective. And it is a very difficult situation, but it is also, every crisis also has its chances, and our business has also very negative sides. And we should then, from on 21, really start to kind of, now for me and what I can observe for the first year of the crisis, let's say 2020, this is as everybody already said, it is only about survival, and this fight will of course continue. But everybody's speaking, economics and politicians are speaking about a big economic crisis coming up. And now politicians, not everywhere, but in big parts of Europe at least, are still pumping in a lot of money into the system, also into the cultural system. So I'm concerned and I'm worried, asking myself, what will happen from on next year, 21, 22, 23? Will we ever go back to normal, or should we kind of come up all together, meaning organizers, curators, agents, managers, musicians, journalists, with new ideas of how to deal with crises like this, and also change the way we used to work. This, for instance, this crazy touring schedule, this overproducing of albums and CDs. Musicians are under so much pressure. Our industry or our business or our sector has certain mechanisms that can be questioned. And I also hear voices from colleagues saying we should slow down, we should kind of produce less, also festivals. You know, it's not about the 80 shows within 4 days, including 20 world premieres and 10 commissions. You know, you can only experience this year. We should downsize maybe, and also work with less artists, and to work with artist residencies, to connect international artists on a substantial level with the local scene and artists, and to create other forms of experiences and environments, you know. And I think that is also an opportunity, because we are all super stressed. You know, nobody can follow all of the information and the scene in total. It's so much, and in my opinion, very often also too much going on. And
Nadine, I mean, what you have said deserves another discussion even. I think it's, I mean, it's again, I think very precious, but is this a hot topic among some people, or is this really something how you feel, or among some close friends, like really to slow things down in terms of production, even production and festivals? And I mean, because I agree, but I was just thinking, is it just me, you know?
I was in Saalfelden, as I said, at that festival, and there I met other colleagues and musicians, and also a couple of journalists that have been there, of course less than in previous years, but still, and we all have the same feeling. We all have the feeling that maybe it's time to rethink and to think things over, and we can only do this as a community all together. And I don't mean that it's, there's not one way, there's not the golden recipe, you know, there's not that one big solution. But to slow down, to downsize, to give more space and freedom to less artists, to make them stay longer at your place, to really connect with local artists, to create something new, to take also the audience on that journey is a big opportunity also for us to kind of, as a reaction to this crisis, downsize and slow down and work in a bit of a different way, you know, more substantial, more this in our business, in the cultural world, we have this one word that is treated everywhere. It's sustainability. So let's take this seriously. What does it mean? You know, and also in terms of climate change, mobility, economic and ecological reasons, there's so much going on in the world, and it's all also connected to this Corona and COVID crisis.
So what you're saying is probably against the capitalist cultural scene.
It is, for sure.
Setting, but worth to take notice. Eric, Mr. Eric, what do you think about the question? And actually, would you want to comment on Nadin's points?
I think Nadine has a lot of fair points, and I think, I mean, obviously Corona's enlightened certain issues, and I think we will see different kind of movements depending on which, you know, where you are and which country you are. For example, here the whole dialogue has been, you know, like the move back to the country kind of thing, and you know, people reconnecting with nature and having more free time and realizing that, well, actually maybe this is what life is about, you know, and trying to see a bigger meaning in your life than just, you know, going to work and like producing the next thing, and that it's actually meaningful to live here and now with your friends and family. So I hopefully this is, you know, something that we will take with us. And then, of course, I mean, in the long run, I think the crisis also, I mean, the way that Nadine is talking about artists touring, it might not even be possible because, you know, some of our airline companies might be out of business. Touring in this way has, in a way, only been possible because there are so many cheap flights between, you know, cities that you can fly from Copenhagen to Stockholm to Oslo to Helsinki to Berlin. I mean, everywhere, you know, like 4 people traveling, you can still get like the economy of just doing one gig in a major capital city. One big difference between maybe sort of like mainland Europe and Scandinavia is that there's not a huge abundance of clubs. And I mean, you know, it's like Sweden is the only international jazz club in Stockholm. People are dying to see all of these bands that we are putting on. And if we don't do it, who's going to do it? You know, international jazz culture will just kind of disappear off the map. In Gothenburg, the second largest jazz club in Sweden, Nefertiti, that we were working a lot with, they had to close down, you know, 2 weeks into the Corona pandemic because they were completely out of cash. So now we don't have, you know, even a partner to work with in Sweden anymore, really. So, I mean, I think, and I mean, it's also a way that the system is working, as Nadine says. I mean, okay, there's, you know, maybe we should spend more time with an artist, but not everyone then can work with like Nubia Garcia or Chewbacca Hutchins, you know, like we need to spread the love a little bit. And truthfully, there's so many good musicians around, and there's so many musicians being educated. Even for Sweden, it's a small country, but with even like a smaller music industry and a tiny jazz scene. And still we are educating, you know, like 40 people from our, you know, the top university of music here. They're coming out every year, you know, and like, who are they going to play to? You know, who's going to promote their shows? There's not enough to go around. And actually, you know, like teachers at these universities have been saying for years that, you know, okay, you know, we can educate all these people, but they're, 70% are just going to go out into unemployment and going to have to find something else to work with, because there's no way that the system can provide for them. And at least in Sweden, the governmental grants and so on for culture has only been going one way since the 80s, and that's down. And no one is seeing more money being put into the system. So, what we have is basically, it's like more mainstream stuff being done, true artists living on really, really crappy conditions. And small clubs like us fighting to survive. So I don't really see it in that way that, we have to do less. Maybe we have to educate less people from certain markets, but we as promoters, I think, have to do as much as we possibly can, because there's a need for it from our audiences and from our artists. And that being said, I see that 2021, hopefully, it's going to be a good year. I think so. At least we will keep on promoting as much as we can. Now from October, we're looking at doing maybe 4 gigs a week, and hopefully the grants will last, for that. So yeah, I don't know, but I'm really positive for 2021.
Thank you for all the notes. I don't want to get too romantic, but I love all these 3 people at this webinar. And when I do my job, I consult them a lot. I ask them questions. We cooperate a lot. We exchange information. It's a nice jazz family that we have. Thank you very much for your time, people. I'm hoping very much to host you in our beautiful island. A little bit cold sea, but nice wine, beautiful food, good weather, those kind of situations. Thank you for attending. I think some of these infos will be extremely helpful for the music community in Turkey, and some of the audience that has nothing to do with music business, but just want to grab some info. Yeah, hoping to see you soon. Thank you, guys.
See ya.
See ya.